different ways. So that's what we call fascicle arrangement. What are some of these arrangements? The first arrangement for these fascicles is called parallel. And that just means that all the fascicles are running in the same direction. Think about two parallel lines, they're right next to each other, right? So that means that all the fascicles in this muscle are going to be parallel to each other. Another arrangement that we could have would be called convergent. And so if things converge, that means they all come together. And so you're going to have a kind of a wide base, and then all of the fascicles are kind of coming in towards one attachment. It's a very broad base to start, and then a narrow attachment. An example of this that we can look at would be the pectoralis major. And the pectoralis major starts actually on the clavicle. It goes all the way along the sternum, so it is a very wide beginning, but it narrows down to one point. It all converges down to one point on the arm. So that would be an example of a convergent muscle. The third arrangement of all of these fascicles are going to be pinnate. Now, pinnate is actually the word for, another word for feather, actually. And so we actually, if you think about like a bird feather, you think about like the way that it kind of has almost a stem or something hard in the middle, and then the feathers come in on both sides. Well, we have what's called a unipinnate, which means if this is our tendon, since we're talking about a muscle, if all of them come in from one side, it's called unipinnate. Uni means one or the same or whole, so unipinnate. If they come in from both sides, or just two sides, this would be bipinnate. Okay. And if you have several, and this can actually be several of these, so maybe we have a couple of these with, maybe feathers coming to here. This would be multi-pinnate. That's another arrangement, pinnate. And the fourth arrangement is circular. And these are, like I talked about, the orbicularis oris and orbicularis oculi going around in a circle around the mouth or the eyes, or the sphincters that go around and guarding the exits, the anal sphincter and the urethral sphincter. They go around in a circle. So circular arrangement of these fascicles is another organization pattern that we have. You usually won't see this word, these arrangement words, and how we name the muscles, but it's relatively, depending on what you're going into, it could be important for you to know those arrangements of fascicles. All right, now if skeletal muscles, one of their functions, or their primary function, is to produce movement. And we know that they're called skeletal muscles because they're attached to the skeleton. The skeleton actually works as a lever for our muscles. Okay? And I think it was this class when we started talking about this a little bit. I said, has anyone had to change a tire before? Okay, I have. Okay. I've had to change a tire. And so if you try to take off the lug nuts with your hand, would you be very successful? No. Okay. What about if your wrench was like this long? Would you be very successful? Probably not. But the longer it gets, the handle, the easier it is to get the lug nuts off. Same thing with like the jack to jack up your car if you're going to change a tire. You have a really short handle, it takes forever, or it's harder. And the longer your handle, the easier it is on you to do that work. So you're working on a lever basis there. Well, your muscles and your bones work in the same fashion. Your muscles are the levers, and your muscles do the work, and the bone is the lever. So how they're attached to each other reduces the amount of work that the muscles have to do to still produce a large amount of work. Okay? And we have three classes of levers. We have a first class, second class, and third class lever. And so kind of by just general definition, a lever is a rigid structure that's used to lift or pry something. And a lever is a rigid structure, so that's the bone structure, is the rigid structure, used to lift or pry something, and it pivots on a fixed point called a fulcrum. Okay? It pivots on a fixed point called a fulcrum. And so we'll talk about the three classes are divided based on where the fulcrum, the load, and the applied force are. So your load is what you're trying to lift. Your fulcrum is that fixed point that the lever is pivoting on. And then your applied force is the contraction of the muscle. Okay, in this case. Okay. So for a first class lever, that means that the fulcrum is in the middle. Here's your fulcrum, here's your load, and here's your applied force. What does that kind of look like? A seesaw. Exactly. A seesaw, the lever is the board of the seesaw. The fulcrum is that point in the middle. One person sits on one end, and to lift that person up, the other person is applying a force down. And then you switch. Now this person is they're going to apply the force down to lift up the load. And then those two play on a seesaw. You're just switching the load and the applied force. But the idea is the same. That's a first class lever. We don't have very many of these in the body, but one example is the muscles of the neck. So we can, if the muscles of the back of the neck, the spine, the vertebra are actually the fulcrum, and so you're going to, your applied force is the muscles of the neck, and you're going to lift up the head. So here's your load, here's your applied force, and the fulcrum is in the middle, and so you're lifting that up. But that's one of the very few that are in the body of a first class lever. Okay. In a second class lever, the applied force, so now the fulcrum is going to be at one end.